How's it going, everybody? This is Kevin Kring with College Golf Local. I am so thrilled to bring on our guest today, Roy Edwards, head golf coach at University of Colorado. He is my favorite coach in the country. I think he is the best coach in the country, and I say that because he was mine. He taught me so many things on the golf course and off, but the most important thing that he taught me, which I still apply, and Coach, I give you all the credit for this, but it is only control what you can control, or only worry about what you can control. Everything else, just, you can't really let it bother you too much. So, Coach, I appreciate that lesson you taught me, and I still try to apply it to everyday life. But I appreciate you taking the time and joining me here today. How are you and the family doing out there in Boulder?
We're doing pretty well. We've got things are good here. Obviously an interesting time around the world, and definitely in college golf. We're just kind of all sitting in here and waiting to get back out there and compete and recruit and be with our teams and everything else.
Yeah, well, that's all you can do. Again, it's kind of like what I just said. There's only so much you can control in a situation like that, and I'm sure that you're embracing it the best way that you can.
Yeah, it was interesting, Kevin. You had mentioned that, and our assistant coach, Derek Tolan, who is a teammate of yours, we were talking about this as this started, and I said, okay, we've got to win the quarantine. So we've got to find a way to do what we can while we're stuck in our homes and with our computers and and not able to get out there to push the program forward, to push our teams forward. And so I think, we're working kind of every day to get better as individuals, as coaches, as our team, as our program. So, it changes what you're doing, but and how you do it, but it doesn't change the end goal. And that's, improving our players, improving our program, improving ourselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have the same kind of view. The first couple of weeks of this quarantine thing, it's kind of hard to piece together what was happening just because the world was changing so quickly. But I do think people who are creative and smart and hardworking have the opportunity to kind of come out of this ahead. And, I'm certainly happy to hear that, as there's no bigger, Colorado golf fan than I am. So all that said, I want to go ahead and get started here and just talk about the recruiting process a little bit to try to better educate these kids, specifically here in Southwest Missouri. And kind of my first question I have for you is just, it's broad and you can take this however you want to, but what does the recruiting process for you look like? Like, what does it take for a kid to be someone that you have never heard of? And then what steps can they take to be somebody who would be on, your short list through communication, tournaments, kind of all that sort of stuff?
Well, I think in general, the best thing for most prospective student athletes to do is what are their scores like? What are their tournament scores? So most coaches are going to really want to see very specifics about what scores have you shot in competitions, where was the tournament, who was the field, and that's the first way to get attention for a coach. And then you're looking at certainly some other things that can separate them. Academics probably being the second one that's the biggest to get that initial attention. One thing I think that's really, really helpful that people need to understand is, okay, as you're a player and you've got tournaments, getting that information and that schedule out to the coaches to show them, hey, two things. One, is, okay, look at the results of this tournament if you can't be there. But if maybe I get an email or another coach gets an email that says, hey, so-and-so is playing at this event. Well, I happen to be going to that event. Even if it's a player I'm not yet recruiting, or coach isn't recruiting, they're going to typically go out and at least watch that player play or hit a few shots or do something because they've shown interest in the school and in that program. So those are kind of the initial things I think that's really, really important. Another thing that I think is big is that coaches want to see is a personal connection with that player. So mom and dad this is time for them to probably kind of help counsel the young man or woman in getting that communication started with that coach directly, with that coach, from the player to the coach, because that player is going to have that relationship with that coach personally at those universities if they end up being on their program. So they want to know what it's like with just that player. Not to say that relationship with the parent's not important; it's very important, but that's a key starting point.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. I mean, I see a lot of kids, and I've heard of stories of kids who they send out a mass email, and it's very obvious that not a lot of work went into the introductory email. Is that something that do you kind of see that sometimes, where maybe they get your name wrong? Or, and like on the contrary, is it something where if a kid takes some time to maybe talk about you or Boulder or something like that as an email, that you're like, okay, this kid took the time, he has the attention to detail, and that kind of helps bump him up at least to someone on your radar? I know if it's scoring average matters, but whenever you're trying to nitpick or differentiate, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think when you're getting down to it after that a little bit, it's okay, what is the fit? And that's an important part of it. I think there's got to be a reason that a player wants to go to a certain school, for studies, for athletics, for whatever, and to see if those are good fits. I think that's an important part of it as well.
Yeah, for sure. Whenever you are getting, a resume from a kid maybe you haven't heard of or you're relatively unfamiliar with, are you, what sort of stuff on the resume are you looking at? I know you mentioned academics and good golf, but are there other things on there you're looking at, maybe volunteering, other sports played, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think all of the above. We've had a different, in my 20 plus years of coaching, you have a makeup of a lot of different types of players. Some were former athletes. Some were, had a bunch of other activities. Like I know you had a really in-depth extracurricular activity list that was very impressive in high school. I think what you're trying to find is, you definitely like well-rounded, but you've also got to see, how those things all tie together. I think most coaches look at players individually and say, okay, they don't really most don't hit a profile for, okay, I'm only recruiting people that have focused on golf the last 4 years, or I'm only recruiting multi-sport athletes, or I'm only recruiting somebody that's, got all these other extracurricular activities. What I think is a fit is, each school has different strengths and weaknesses. And I think each individual has their interests and their kind of strengths fit into those different schools. And I think that's an important part of it, is the kid needs to find that fit, because a lot of times a player, they certainly have to have a love for the game of golf that is a huge level of desire and competition. But yet the other things outside of it are very, very important for them to get in an environment and a culture that they feel like they're getting better as a person, that they're getting better as a player, that they like their teammates, they like the coaches, they like just kind of the entire, location that they're at, whatever it is. And I think all of that goes into it. And that's as important on the player side as it is on a coach side, looking for that fit.
Yeah, I've had a few parents kind of ask me. I know you would talk about sports for a second, but they've talked to me about, oh, so and so starting to get pretty serious about golf, and I think they should stop playing basketball. They should stop playing soccer, so they could only focus on that. I know you said some coaches only recruit multi-sport or whatever, but what would you, to the best of your ability, what would you say to a parent who they says, oh, I think he should stop playing other sports for the risk of injury or not being as good at golf as he would be if he specialized, basically?
Well, I mean, I would simply tell them that in coaching Gary Woodland, who played 4 sports until, I mean, he played 2 sports in college, his first year in basketball, and he was basically still competing in golf. I think it's kind of crazy. I don't think you kind of an easy way to think about it. I think you play as many sports as you can until somebody tells you you can't play those sports anymore. A quick story about Gary. I asked him one time when I was coaching him at Kansas, and I said, hey, when you are under pressure on the golf course, what experiences are you drawing from? And he didn't pull a golf story out of it. He pulled a basketball story when he was fouled in an NCAA tournament for Washburn with no time on the clock, with them down by 1 shot, and he's got 2 free throws. And he said, I make 1 free throw out of 2. Maybe we win, maybe we don't. We go to overtime. I miss both. We lose. I make both. We win. It's like every single possibility is under my control and what my performance is, and I'm the only one that has control over it. And he said he sat up there on that free throw line, put 2 foul shots right between the middle of the hoop, and they won the game. And he said, every single thing like that, every single opportunity or every single, experience after that he's been nervous, he said has been easy, because nothing compared to the difficulty of that scenario. And so that could only be drawn upon if he hadn't had those, if he'd had those experiences playing basketball, and it could be some other sport. And so the great athletes, I think what's important is the multi-sport athlete, and Gary and some other ones, his desire and drive and competitiveness, condensed itself from those other sports into golf. I've seen other people that were natural athletes that competed in a lot of other sports at a pretty high level. And instead of letting all of that energy condense from those other sports into one as they got into golf or another sport, they kept it the same, and then they used that energy somewhere else. And they never really blossomed as a great player because they didn't use that tremendous work ethic or competitiveness or athleticism to then build it. That's where it kind of falls away a little bit if you're not careful. And that comes from within you. And so in that burn from within Gary and some other guys that I think utilize those multi-sport scenarios. I think some coaches still say, hey, concentrate on golf. I think it's a mistake personally, but that's for everybody else to make that call. One other quick story is a coach that I learned a ton from at Vanderbilt, Preston McFall, who's now the golf coach at NC State, would be a great guest for your show. He was a high school quarterback. Well, he broke his femur his senior year in high school, or maybe it was his junior year. He got hit by Bernardo Harris, who ended up being an all-pro linebacker for the Green Bay Packers, and he couldn't play golf for a year. Well, he became a great player at NC State. It didn't stop him, and that negativity and that adversarial issue really helped him become a good player because he had to go through some setbacks.
Yeah, and I imagine too, because I was a kid, like I played basketball my freshman year, and then I decided I was going to be all in on golf because one, I loved it, but also I was pretty frail at 120 pounds, and all these other sports I wanted to play, like football and such. The risk of injury might have been a little higher, but if you only play golf, like you don't, even at the high school level, team golf in high school is not the same as team golf in college. Your team in college is like your family, and you're out there for them. You're rooting for them. You want to practice with each other to get better. So that doesn't really translate high school golf to college in the way if you play high school basketball or high school soccer or football or something like that. So I'm sure that, again, as a coach, I don't want to speak for you, but just knowing a kid, if he's a captain of a team that's a basketball team or something like that, you're like, this guy can lead a team, and that is very, very, that's valuable. That's not something you can necessarily just teach out of the blue.
Right. No, that's a great point, Kevin. And I think that's the difference is, if coaching a college golf environment looks much more similar to a high school basketball or high school football environment from the intensity and level of coaching. And then you also have, if you have 10 players on a college golf team, the difference between 1 and 10 is way, way tighter than usually even 1 and 2 on a high school team. Typically, most players on a college team were the best player in the history of their high school. So, it's a much more narrow gap. And so it's a different intensity level. I think that's one of the pieces that, like in the process of attracting Gary Woodland and recruiting him in high school, and it was a long time ago now, he wasn't a great high school golfer because he was concentrating on some of these other things. But we knew we wanted to recruit him when he was named the most outstanding player of the state high school basketball tournament his sophomore year. He scored, I think, 24 points in the state championship game as a sophomore to win that game for Shawnee Heights High School. And so that's an extreme, obviously. But he has been through tough moments, been through coaching that I think is, there's great environments and great opportunities in high school. I had a great high school golf coach and experience, but those experiences are just a little bit different, to your point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an apples to oranges kind of comparison of the high school environment. I know, especially my high school golf environment, I didn't quite get the team. I loved a couple other guys that were on the team, but it wasn't exactly, they struggled to shoot scores below 90. And, it's not exactly like then you show up on campus in Boulder and you got guys throwing rounds in the 60s at you and you're just hoping to make the top 5. I mean, and that's something even a lot of people don't realize is that it's not like a high school tournament where you just get to go play and you're playing tournaments. If you are not in the top 5 at your team, at your school, you're not playing in tournaments, and all you get to do, like the peak of your year is playing well in a qualifier. And that's that's not fun. So I think it's important for people to kind of do their homework and kind of what we talked about earlier
Right.
and find the right fit, find the right school where you can play. Because again, my personal experiences, my favorite moments, on your team were the van rides, waiting in the airports, dinners on the road, those things that we got to experience whenever you're traveling. It wasn't the 6 a.m. workouts. It wasn't necessarily a qualifier knowing I had to go do a test or study for a test the next night. It was all those moments on the road. So I just want other people to have those experiences and find the right fit where they're able to make the top 5 and travel as well.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. I want to talk to you a little bit about the kind of tournaments that kids are playing in. I've heard a lot of kids and their families say whenever I'm like, oh, what tournaments are you playing in this summer? And they just say, oh, we're going to try to play as many AJGAs as we can. Because the assumption is if you are going to play in college, you must play an AJGA. Everything else doesn't matter. And that's the only path basically. But what would you say to a kid who, I don't know, they might not be a Division I level golfer, but they're putting all the eggs in like the AJGA basket? Are other tournaments valuable, or is that kind of the primary place that all coaches are looking at?
I would say I think any events are great to play in. I think one thing that's an awesome, you always want to see players who are not afraid to play anything, whether it's the local tournament all the way up to the highest levels. Anybody that shies away from an event because it's a lower level event is not somebody that I think really truly cares deeply about playing great golf. The AJGA events are great events. There's a lot of great events. They're expensive. They have, I think we go to them. A lot of coaches go to them, but it would be a mistake to say coaches just look at one type of event over another. Golf is very expensive, as every parent that is going to listen to this realizes. And there's a lot of great events that have tremendous value that may not be as fancy or whatever, but they're great events because you're getting better. And you never know as a player which tournament is going to really help you evolve and grow and develop as a competitor. I think there's a lot of value in even getting in an event. Maybe it's a smaller event, you don't play great, but you find a way to gut it out and do something down the stretch under some pressure to help you get better. Well, that's only going to help you at higher level events that you compete at. So I always look at golfers as kind of layers. You're building these layers and you're kind of like bricks, in this foundation. You're putting in, you're building it up, and it doesn't really, you don't really know what creates that foundation. It might be these AJGA events. It might be success at the lower level that allows you to be more successful, going forward. So I think anything you can do to be competitive, whether that's playing with your buddies, playing with guys at your club that are older and making it mean something, all of those things that make you nervous playing golf will make you better and ready for whatever lies down the road.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that one of the best things you touched on is like what happens whenever you feel some pressure, because I think maybe if you're playing a lower level event or something like that, maybe the first hole feels a little different. The first couple holes feel different, but coming down the stretch, whenever you're in contention, those feelings start to feel very similar. And I can speak to that I've played some really small events, and I had to, get up and down in the last hole to force a playoff. And I was every bit as aware of the surroundings and the situation as a bigger tournament with the same situation. And I drew on that experience at a smaller level where I was successful, and it helped me be successful at the next one. And like you said, I kept building those bricks coming up. And that's what I recommend. I mean, put your feet against the fire. You might think, oh, I'm the best player here. Good, go win, prove it. Right. And then, go from there basically. So I wanted to ask you within, again, talking through these tournaments, whenever you are out recruiting, what are you looking at? I'm not talking about kids, but I'm just talking about within a player, whenever you're watching them play for the first time. Are you looking at their swing, their demeanor, their parents, when they, practice routine? What are some of the things that you're looking at when you're out there?
Well, I think coaches generally, and I can't answer it specifically to me, but I can answer it from a general statement. I think most of the best coaches are going out there and they're looking at all of that stuff. they're trying to figure out a lot of the different things that's going on with a player. What makes them tick? What makes them play well? What makes them play, when they get off their game? How do they handle it when they're maybe not playing their best? Because the reality is most of the time you're not going to play your absolute best. There's a small fraction of time you're playing at an elite level of your best, and there's a small fraction of time that you're playing poorly, and the vast majority is that middle ground. Well, it's that middle ground that's going to help our team, and it's going to have you become better. So, what does that look like? You want to see all of those things. And it goes back a little bit, Kevin, to what you're talking about that you mentioned at the top of the show is worry about what you have control over. Are they, golf is the ultimate game that one thing doesn't have any effect on the next, right? You can sit there and say on any given golf hole, yeah, you just hit it here and it was because of what you just did. But ultimately what you do on that shot has nothing to do with what just happened and what's ahead of you. And then the ultimate reset is when you hole out on a hole and go to the next tee. Literally nothing on the next tee has anything to do with anything that happened. Everybody restarts from one hole to the next. And so, how do players approach that adversity? I think are all things that we look at. And so, you're just trying to kind of see those things. Obviously, what all coaches are trying to do is they're trying to project players. Okay, how do we project them out 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now to what kind of player they are and what maybe they can do specifically to a specific coach, and what my strengths and weaknesses are as a coach to help somebody get better. Can I help that person? And those are the types of things you're looking at when coaches are evaluating. It's real easy to sit here and say, well, you play good and everything works out. But there's a little bit more involved in that as well.
Yeah, I've had a kid. He told me that, and he let me know he was pretty distraught because there was a school that he was interested in, and the coach watched him play, and he went like bogey, bogey, bogey on the holes that the coach watched him play, and the coach left, and the kid was like crushed by this. But I told him, I was like, listen, if the coach is willing to spend time watching you, he probably knows that one, you're possibly good enough for his program, and there's probably nothing better you could do than play poorly in front of him, because every coach knows that bad golf happens and they want to see how you handle it and how you respond to it. Right. And I think he ended up, from the rest of his round, he made like 4 pars and a birdie. And I was like, he'll probably take note of that and be more impressed by that than if you would have gone birdie, par, birdie in the 3 holes that he saw. Do you think that's pretty accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of misnomers on why coaches come see certain holes. I mean, a lot of times what we do is we plan out our day, especially because we're limited on the days that we have, to say, okay, this guy tees off here. I think I can catch him on this hole, watch him for this hole, go see this other guy, when he gets off of that green, and go to this tee, and I can see another guy play a certain number of holes. And so a lot of times that has nothing to do with what anybody's results are. And I think what's a fun story, and Coach McGraw's been on here and did a great job. But one of the things that I remember having a conversation with him, it was 12 years ago. We were at Sea Island. It was the Western Junior. We were recruiting a kid named Zach Blair. Zach was from Utah, tiny kid. He's still a really small guy. Well, Zach's on the PGA Tour. He's won, I think, $4 million on the tour. And I've never in my life enjoyed watching a guy play golf more than I enjoy watching Zach Blair play golf. Like, I could just watch him play golf all day long. And Coach McGraw made an interesting point. We were watching him, and he goes, he's just watching this energy of this guy, this Zach Blair, and doesn't hit it very far. And, he wants to go to Oklahoma State. We're trying to get him, and he's pretty much said no to everybody else. And he says, don't you just want to take, Zach Blair's heart out and put it in every one of your players? And it was an unbelievable point. It's so true, because if you play with that passion as you're a young man, if you truly have a passion for the game, it's going to show up to a coach. And all that it takes is that one coach or that one program to get it right. And Zach went on to a great career at BYU. He was an awesome leader. He's a world-class young man. And his passion for the game is still burns today, because that passion and that drive over the long term works out better for college programs. It works better for players. And then all of a sudden, maybe you can even touch the sun like Zach's doing, playing on the PGA Tour at a high level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have experience, you know, from knowing him through junior golf and college, and like it was just like there's like a grit to him. Like there was just like I refuse to let anything bother me. I'm playing a sport I love, and I'm going to just battle every single second that I'm out here. And I'm sure that's kind of some of what you're getting at with kind of the heart of it. Like it's just a
Right.
joy and a grind and like all that good stuff kind of balled into one. And it's why, you know, even being behind the eight ball, maybe size and speed wise, he's still going on to, you know, keep his tour card. It's pretty darn impressive.
It sure is.
Whenever you're out there, are you allowed communication with parents during a round? I've had a couple parents think that coaches were kind of blowing them off,
Uh,
you know, on the cart path, something like that, where a parent will come up and want to talk to the coach, and then the coach is like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't." Is there a reason for that? Are there rules behind that, or is that just, you know, you kind of want some privacy throughout the day?
yeah, no, it's probably one of the weirdest things because typically when you're watching a junior golf tournament, there's maybe a couple of coaches, if any, and it's parents and the player, and you're just kind of following along. There's a lot of idle time. Most people that in that scenario want to have a conversation with whoever's out there. Unfortunately, most of the time, having a conversation more than an exchange of a greeting is not allowed. And so I purposely try to physically separate myself. If a conversation comes up, you typically that kind of the general rule is you let the parent say something, say, hey, I'm sorry, you know, I'd love to talk to you later on, but we can't. And, you know, as a reminder, and, you know, kind of go from there. So it is 100% not a blowing a parent off or something else. It's because we don't want to commit violations. And I would go one step further. Any coach that's out there having conversations with you after, you know, before a certain time, quite frankly, they're violating the rules. And so that's kind of I think something we want to educate people on too, that's against what the rules are. And there are some things that we are allowed to do, you know, have contacts with parents during rounds of golf at a certain time frame and age, but we're very limited on those. So typically that parent is going to know that that's what's going on because they're going to communicate that up front.
Right. And I know one of the main dates I've certainly heard we know about is June 15th, after a sophomore year going into a junior year.
Yeah.
And I want to also say what you said is a great point, where if a coach is willing to bend the rules on that, it's something that a parent should take note on, because again, you're not just recruiting a player is also trying to find the right fit for them. And if a coach is maybe willing to bend the rules or something like that, the parent should take note of what that could potentially mean going forward. Because just the way you're looking for little things to differentiate a player, players should be looking for little things that differentiate coaches and a program and experiences and stuff like that. So that's really well said, and something that, you know, I haven't heard yet. So that's certainly something I'll pass along to some of the parents just to be aware of. Is it's not being rude; it's following the rules, and they exist to protect all the relationships and the experience of being recruited and everything like that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, just in general, whenever kind of starting this whole recruiting process, you know, it's the process has been moved up and up and up, and I know there are dates in place, like we just said, the June 15th date. But when would you recommend, or maybe broadly, say a good time would be for a kid to start putting together a resume, maybe sending a few emails to coaches, maybe just putting together a list of schools they're interested in, putting together a schedule, all that sort of stuff? When would be a good time in their high school career to start this process?
Well, and I think this has changed a little bit in the last year or two. I think recruiting has shifted a little bit later. It's a little, and that's the one thing I think that's important too, is the rules at the Division II level and Division III and JUCO and NAI are all a little bit different. So some junior college coaches that I talk to, they recruit late because they're trying to see, okay, who are the guys that maybe don't get to the Division I school that they want to. There's great opportunities at that level. And then, you know, what I would say is I think at the completion of the freshman year, the bulk of coaches recruiting on the road is in the summer when we go to tournaments. That's when the big events are, most of them. And I think that's the best opportunity. What we can do before June 15th of a player before their junior year, we can watch them play. So, you know, that after that freshman year, sending initial emails with playing schedule, kind of this time frame. If you're a freshman in high school now, maybe sending it out now. Undetermined when we're going to be back out on the road, being able to watch tournaments. I'm hopeful there's some of that this summer, but then all of a sudden we start to build the lists of, okay, these guys have expressed interest. I'm going to kind of see which players slot in, which players are playing which tournaments, and then kind of begin that process. We can't respond to those emails. However, we read those emails. So I am reading the emails that we get. So sending them periodic result emails, schedule updates. Here's what's going on. Here's how my grades went my freshman year. Those types of things. You're building a rapport with the coach, and you're getting your name in front of that coach. And I think that's very important to do to start then. The other thing I would say, kind of as a back end of that, there's no real timeline on when you need to feel like you need to commit to a school. I've heard a lot of stories, from different parents or players that say, well, these people have said, well, we've recruited you, we've committed, so you're behind the game. Well, people can commit at any time up until the start of class, really. There's still some good players trying to find places to play in the class of 2020, if you can believe it. So, as that goes, like I kind of said before, you just have to find that one school. You don't have to have all of them. Like, you just have to have the right one that you want to go to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing you kind of touched on, where you kind of like talking points is, I've told some kids that I think it's really valuable to have constant communication. Like, don't send one email with a resume, schedule, swing video, ACT score. Like, don't send that all in one. It's good to have, like, basically be able to have an email subject line that is, resume, another one, schedule, where it's almost like they're staying in your stream of consciousness that way. If you get one email a month from a kid who's a freshman, I think and again, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like to me there would be more value in that than just one email a year with 12 different talking points in it.
No doubt, because you're trying to develop a relationship, and the rules don't allow it that well, especially early on. And so a lot of that, quite frankly, has to come from the player. I think if you can afford it, it's a good idea possibly to go to a camp. There's a lot of good camps that are at specific schools that I know. I mean, my first introduction to college golf was going to a college golf camp. And that's kind of where I met the players and coaches and realized, man, this is something that I want to be. Those are expensive, but that's another little option that is allowable, that can happen. So, recommend something like that as well. And whatever it is, there's a lot of free things you can do too. And one of them is constantly emailing and updating all the things we mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I know going to a camp, it's kind of like a little free. It's like not free, but like a pass in to see the program, see the coaches, right, see the facilities, all those sort of things. And again, it allows you to see a kid on a level that you would not be able to otherwise, just through right, communication. So I also think that it's important for some parents to think that, like, just because they send their kid to this school's golf camp does not mean a scholarship is imminent. Like, that's not how it works either. But it is an inside track that it's also a great experience. I remember doing, I was pretty young, but I did a college golf camp like that. And it was an awesome experience to stay in a dorm and hang out with some guys and all that sort of stuff. And I don't know if you're allowed to speak on it, but I can certainly say the Colorado golf camp is pretty darn amazing. So yes, I won't let you say anything to that. I wanted to ask you a little bit, I got two more questions here for you, but the process of walk-ons, I've had a few kids and families around here over the years. Honestly, they don't understand how the process works, and they're kind of behind, and they just say, whatever, I'm just going to go to Missouri State or Mizzou and I'll walk on. I'll just go to the coach, introduce myself, and I'll walk on. I tell them that is a hard path. And even still, whenever they hear stories on the Golf Channel about, this player or that player that walked onto their college team, my assumption is that player is a recruited walk-on or a preferred walk-on, something like that. It's not just like the coaches were unaware this individual was on campus. Is there anything that you can say or you would say to a kid or a family who they just assume that if they show up in your office, they're getting a bag and gear?
Yeah, that does not happen really anywhere anymore. I think, like, kind of to your point, most people that walk on they have that spot guaranteed before they show up. There are exceptions to that, those are rare. I was in a golf program that we had actually a ton of walk-ons at Kansas. And Colorado at the same time, when I was in school and before that, had a lot of walk-ons. That you could add players. The way some of the gender equity stuff has changed and the costs associated with bringing on a student athlete, even if they're a non-scholarship player. And I think that's one thing most people don't realize is the cost of keeping a student athlete for athletic departments is massive before you even get to that scholarship part of it. And so that's one reason that those opportunities are a little bit less. But once those opportunities are it makes that opportunity on the team that much greater, because they want to support. And that's a cool thing the last 10 to 15 years that I've seen is the support you get for all of the athletes equally is amazing, from golfers to football players. So it's an incredible deal. I joke around about it all the time that it's not the real world, and it's not. It's, the food and the treatment and the academics and whatever. I mean, those are, tens of thousands of dollars an athlete a year for athletic departments at the highest levels. So that's one reason why those are not there. And I think what I recommend, instead of maybe wanting to say, okay, I'm just going to walk on a certain place, really the identification of the type of program profile that you fit in as a golfer is really important to learn. And it takes some experts like yourself. It takes some self-reflection and really have an understanding of who you are as a player to fit into a certain category and profile of a school. That's a very important thing to start really identifying late in that junior year and then that summer afterwards, to help you find that right fit that you can go compete and get better as a player and find a place that you want to get an education.
That's perfectly said. Nothing I can add to that. That's great advice, and like that's a little soundbite I'll certainly be passing along to some of these kids that have kind of had that idea. Just because it just bums me out when I hear that, because some of the kids are good enough to play at maybe a smaller level school, but they just have the assumption that, oh, it's okay, I'll just get there. And I just know when they make that decision, their career is ending. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it just kind of bums me out because, again, it's like I said earlier, I just view college golf and the team, it's like a family, and I was so. Like I said, I just have such great memories from it. I want people to have those similar experiences that I did, for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you have, like these players that they just don't quite have the right idea. We used to joke around about as coaches, like, oh, I'm going to give out a bag, just I might give the guy a bag and that's all it really took. But those days are kind of over at the high levels of Division I. I talked to a longtime friend of mine who ran all of TaylorMade's promotions for years and years and years at the collegiate and developmental tour level. And he said that college golf is the cheapest and best developmental tour in the world. And you basically at the highest levels of Division I, you don't have a golf expense. You're gonna go get probably a scholarship it's probably not going to be everything, but it's going to offset some money that you probably have saved or you're going to go get a student loan on anyway. And you've got a 3, 4, 5 years to really develop and grow as a player. It's an absolute no-brainer. And if you can, and there's so many opportunities at all different levels that are great, petri dishes for that development too.
Yeah, it's true. You want people to have those experiences, because you see also from the PGA Tour, like not every single player, played at Stanford or Texas or anything like that. People are from all over. I mean, a lot of they're players from the north, they're players from Division 2, 3, JUCOs. I mean, it all exists. It's just a matter of, can you kind of open yourself up to those opportunities? Sometimes that means humbling yourself. I know a lot of people just assume they're good enough for Division I without having a full understanding of what it takes. And like you said it perfectly, in self-reflection, looking in the mirror and having a true understanding of the type of player you are and what would make you a good fit at a good program. And what's the reason for a school or a coach or a team to invest X number of dollars, but also the amount of time that you put in as the head coach to each individual player. And if a guy's averages 77 in high school and doesn't really expose himself in big junior tournaments, that's a big commitment for you to even give that roster spot a consideration or anything like that, because that's time commitment, it's money committed, it's all those sort of things. So
yeah, it's exactly right. That's exactly.
One last question for you here, and it's broad, and you can kind of take this however you want to. But I was just wondering, what would be one piece of advice, or kind of the biggest thing that you would say to a kid who comes to you and says, "I want to play golf in college. What should I do?" What would you say to them?
I mean, that's a great question. It's hard to wrap up into one small thing, but I would say the key thing that most coaches would tell them is find a place that does two things. One, and this is the most important one, that you want to go to school there, even if you can't be on the golf team. Okay. Some people already know they want to go to a big state school. Some people know they want to go to a small private school. Find the type of place that you want to go to school. Then see where the golf team fits in from there. And if you find yourself looking and comparing different golf programs, it's really, really important. The players that develop, they have to play in tournaments. And as you said at kind of the top of the show, it's not easy to qualify for a lot of tournaments. And so what you have to do is say, okay, how do I really fit in with the lineup there? Don't compare your high school or junior golf scores to what the college golf scoring averages are. Those are not accurate. Your 74 average in junior golf is probably about an 80 in college golf. You're not competitive at the Division I level. Okay, so they don't really work there. Compare, like, have you beaten any of these players? Have you competed in your state amateur, and how did it work out in that scenario? So you've got to find a spot that I really feel like the first day that you get into that program, that you feel like you can play okay and qualify for a tournament. Not your best, not bad and make it, but okay. That means you're in an environment where you're being challenged every day, but yet you play well, you're going to be able to travel to these tournaments. Because then showing up in Albuquerque, New Mexico in late September with 6-inch rough, and it's 40 degrees in the morning and windy, and you got to find a way to beat 4-time All-Americans like Peter Quest. It's a hard thing to do, and so you've got to figure out how to do that, and positioning yourself for that is the best. And that could be Division III in AI junior college. One quick story is I was playing in the Waste Management Open Pro-Am a couple of years ago, and we played with Abraham Answer. I tried to recruit Abraham out of the junior colleges in Texas. He's from Mexico. He didn't play AJGA events. He didn't get any attention, got no callbacks as a high school senior. Well, he goes to junior college, becomes a great junior college player, ends up going to the University of Oklahoma, kind of qualifies for some events, quickly becomes our number one player halfway through his junior year, becomes a great player, obviously goes out to the PGA Tour. He's had a great career on the PGA Tour. He won the Australian Open in late 2018. And he has that, he found a place in the junior college that he could grow and develop. He then found a place at an Oklahoma program, which was good, but they weren't as good as until Abraham got there. He elevated them. He was in an environment, they're playing great tournaments. He kept growing and evolving. And there's a lot of stories like that around the country. So those are the kind of two pieces: is find a place you want to go to school, that you like the academics where you are, that you could see yourself being without the golf team, and then making sure you fit into that competitive environment to where you're going to grow and develop as a player by playing in tournaments.
That's perfect, Coach. I appreciate the way you put that. That's a great story to back it up too. So, Coach, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me this morning, and like I said, better educate the kids around here on what it actually takes to play at the next level, and kind of some stories to back it up. I always say you're the best storyteller I've ever met. So I love whenever you say I got a quick story. So I appreciate it.
Well, it's always longer. It's always a long story. It's never a quick story, but thank you, Kevin. Keep up the great work. You're doing some great stuff for them there at College Golf Local, and that's a great service you're providing to those kids and their families.
Thanks, Coach. All the best to you and your family, and hopefully we'll see you out there on the course soon.
Cool. Thank you.